History is often written by the victors, but the most significant event in the timeline of humanity was written by the seemingly defeated. 2,000 years ago, on a limestone hill outside the walls of Jerusalem, a coalition of powers, religious, political, and military, conspired to extinguish a single life. They believed that by driving nails through the hands of the Nazarene, they were securing their authority. They believed that the cross was a period at the end of a sentence. They were wrong. The cross was a comma. Behind the execution of Jesus of Nazareth stood powerful men, men of logic, men of law, men of gold, and men of steel. They acted out of the oldest human motivations: greed, envy, political survival, and the terrifying fear of losing control. They looked at the Son of God and saw a problem to be solved, and so they solved it with blood. But history and the ancient texts record a chilling epilogue to this conspiracy, a pattern that defies coincidence. Almost every major figure involved in the judicial murder of Christ met an end that mirrored the darkness of their deeds. From the marble halls of Rome to the cliffs of Jerusalem, a shadow pursued them. Galatians 6-7 warns us, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." Tonight, we open the archives of antiquity. We will look beyond the Sunday school narratives and into the grit of Josephus, the shadows of the Apocrypha, and the dusty records of the early church. We will trace the timelines of the conspirators to uncover their horrible death's end, the shocking mercy that was, until the very end, still within their reach. Do you choose the judgment of history or the mercy of the mystery? Let us walk into the shadows. To understand their fates, we must first understand their world. First-century Judea was a powder keg waiting for a spark. It was crushed under the iron boot of the Pax Romana. Peace kept by the sword. The air was thick with messianic fever. The Jewish leadership was fracturing, caught between the purity of the Torah and the pragmatism of survival under Rome. In this volatile mix, Jesus was not just a spiritual teacher, he was a destabilizing element. To the Sanhedrin, he was a theological anarchist. To Rome, he was a potential political To the dark powers described in the Gnostic texts, Archonzi was an invasion of light into a closed system of darkness. The death of Jesus was not an accident. It was a bureaucratic necessity. It was a collaborative effort between the temple and the empire. But what these men didn't realize is that they were not the chess players. They were the pieces. The apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus suggests that the underworld itself trembled as these men plotted, knowing that their victory would result in the harrowing of hell. As they wove their net of betrayal, they were unknowingly weaving their own shrouds. The universe seeks balance. When innocent blood is spilled, the ground itself cries out for an accounting. Let us examine the ledger of these lives, one by one. I, Judas Iscariot. The silence of the silver. We begin with the insider Judas Iscariot, the only disciple from Judea, while the others were Galileans. A man of numbers, a man of logic. He walked with the light of the world, yet his soul became a camera, obscure, absorbing the image but flipping it upside down. He witnessed the impossible. He saw leprosy vanish like dust. He saw the dead inhale breath. Yet, the Gnostic Gospel of Judea, controversial text discovered in the 1970s, paints him not merely as a villain, but as a man confused by the nature of the kingdom. He wanted a kingdom of swords. Jesus offered a kingdom of souls. Disillusionment turned to greed. Matthew 26 records the transaction. 30 pieces of silver. The price of a slave, the price of a gored donkey in Exodus 21. He sold the infinite for the price of livestock. But look at the aftermath. When the condemnation came, the money burned his hands. He tried to return it. But the religious machine he served had no return policy. What is that to us? See thou to that. The coldest words in Scripture. The Bible records 2 deaths for Judas, often seen as contradictory, but historically Matthew says he hanged himself. Acts says he fell headlong and burst asunder. Tradition and topography solve the riddle. Judas went to the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, the city's garbage dump, a place anciently associated with child sacrifice to Moloch. He hanged himself on the edge of a cliff. Imagine the scene. The rope snaps, or the branch breaks. The body, bloated by the heat of the Middle Eastern sun, plunges into the jagged rocks below. The field of blood, Akeldama was purchased with his returned money. He died in the very place that symbolized hell on earth. He sought to force Jesus' hand, but only forced his own destruction. 2. Caiaphas, the politician of God. Joseph Caiaphas, the high priest. The high priest, the man who wore the ephod, the breastplate of judgment. He was a pragmatist, a survivor. He held the high priesthood for 18 years, a miracle of political survival under Roman rule. His philosophy was utilitarian. It is expedient for us that one man should die for the people. John 11:50. Better to sacrifice one innocent visionary than to risk the wrath of Rome destroying the nation. It was a logical calculation. It was also moral bankruptcy. In 1990, archaeologists in Jerusalem discovered an ornate limestone bone box in ossuary inscribed with the name Yosef bar Caiapha, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Inside were the bones of a 60-year-old man. It is the physical proof of his existence, but his end was not glorious. Shortly after the crucifixion, the political tides turned. The Roman governor Vitellius deposed Caiaphas. The man who defined himself by his power was stripped of his robes. History records that he faded into obscurity. Imagine the torment of his final years. As the movement of the Way exploded in Jerusalem, as miracles were done in the name of the man he condemned, Caiaphas sat in the shadows of his former glory. He died knowing he had failed to stop the Galilean. His ossuary contained his bones, but his legacy was dust. 3. Annas. The spider in the web behind Caiaphas stood Annas. The patriarch, the godfather of the Jerusalem priesthood. Though deposed by Rome years earlier, he held the strings. 5 of his sons became high priests. He was the power behind the throne, the first to interrogate Jesus in the dark. He was a man of immense wealth, controlling the bazaars of the sons of Annas, the temple market where sacrifices were sold at extortionate rates. Jesus had threatened his wallet when he overturned the tables. For Annas, this was business. The Bible is silent on his death, but the judgment of history was brutal. In AD 66, the Jewish revolt against Rome exploded. The zealots' Jewish revolutionaries targeted the aristocratic priesthood, whom they saw as Roman collaborators. The house of Annas was besieged. His wealth was plundered. His son, Annanos, was assassinated. The dynasty Annas, built on corruption, was dismantled brick by brick. He likely died watching his legacy burn, realizing that the temple of stone he protected was nothing compared to the temple of the body he had destroyed. Quartoum, Pontius Pilate, the man who knew better. Pontius Pilate. The governor, the man who looked truth in the eye and asked, "What is truth?" He is the tragic figure of the narrative, a man trapped between his conscience and his career. His wife warned him, "Have nothing to do with that just man." Matthew 27-19. Dreams in the ancient world were seen as messages from the gods. This was a divine intervention. Pilate tried to wash his hands, a theatrical gesture of innocence, but water cannot cleanse the soul. Eusebius, the church historian, and the apocryphal Acts of Pilate tell us his fate. A few years after the crucifixion, Pilate authorized a brutal massacre of Samaritans at Mount Gerizim. Rome had had enough. He was recalled to face the emperor. Pilate was exiled to Vienna, Alabrogum, modern Vienne, France, or, by some legends, to the wild mountains of Switzerland near Mount Pilate. Stripped of power, consumed by tea-washing syndrome, forever trying to clean his hands. Tradition says he committed suicide. He threw himself into the Rhone River or a mountain lake. The man who sentenced the author of life took his own life. He sacrificed justice for security, and in the end, lost both. V. Herod Antipas, the fox, and the silence Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee. Jesus called him that fox, a man of appetites, who had already murdered John the Baptist to please a dancing girl. When Jesus stood before him, Herod didn't want truth. He wanted a magic show. He hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. Luke 23:8. But Jesus did something terrifying. He said nothing. To Pilate, Jesus spoke of truth. To the high priest, he spoke of power. To Herod, silence. There is no judgment heavier than the silence of God. When God stops speaking to you, your conscience has been seared. Herod mocked the King of Kings with a purple robe, but the mockery turned inward. Years later, driven by the ambition of his wife Herodias, Herod went to Rome to demand the title of king from Emperor Caligula. Instead of a crown, he received an accusation. He was charged with treason and banished to Gaul, modern France, Spain border. He died in exile, stripped of his wealth, his title, and his power. The man who treated the Son of God as a court jester died as a fool in a foreign land. Vie the soldiers in Longinus, the spear of destiny, and what of the hands that drove the nails? The Roman legionaries. Hardened men. To them, this was just another Tuesday. They gambled for his clothes, the only earthly possession Jesus had left. But tradition, specifically the Gospel of Nicodemus and the Golden Legend, zooms in on one soldier, the one who pierced Jesus' side with a spear to ensure death. Tradition names him Longinus. Legend says Longinus was nearly blind. When he pierced the side of Christ, blood and water splashed onto his face, restoring his sight, whether physical or spiritual. His vision cleared. Truly, this was the Son of God. While many soldiers likely died in the endless frontier wars of Rome, tradition holds that Longinus laid down his sword. He became a monk in Cappadocia and was eventually martyred for the faith. Here, the pattern breaks. The horrible death turns into a glorious martyrdom. Why? Because he acknowledged the blood. He didn't wash his hands of it. He let it cover him. 7. The crowd. The echo of a curse finally. The crowd. The fickle mob that shouted Hosanna on Sunday and crucify him on Friday. In the heat of the moment, manipulated by the priests, they shouted a curse that would haunt history. His blood be on us and on our children. Matthew 27-25. They meant it as a legal acceptance of guilt. History took it as a prophecy. 40 years later, one biblical generation, ad 70, the Roman legions under Titus surrounded Jerusalem. The siege was horrific. Josephus writes that the famine was so severe mothers ate their own children. The city that rejected the bread of life starved to death. When the walls were breached, over 1 million Jews were slaughtered. The temple was burned, the gold melted into the cracks of the stones, and soldiers pried them apart, literally leaving not one stone upon another. Just as Jesus predicted, those who survived were crucified by the thousands on the hills surrounding the city. The city that crucified their Messiah was crucified by their oppressors. The curse they spoke over themselves came to pass with terrifying literalism. It is easy to look back at these men, Judas, Caiaphas, Pilate, and see them as monsters, caricatures of evil. But if we look closely, the mirror reflects something uncomfortable. We are them. We are Judas when we trade our integrity for profit, selling out the divine for 30 pieces of silver in the marketplace. We are Caiaphas when we sacrifice the truth to protect our status, our institutions, or our nation. We are Pilate when we stand before a difficult moral choice and choose the path of least resistance, washing our hands and saying, "It's not my problem." We are Herod when we treat spirituality as entertainment, looking for a vibe or a miracle, but refusing to submit to the silence of discipline. The trial of Jesus is not just a historical event. It is a perpetual state of the human heart. Every day, truth stands before us. Every day, we have to decide. Do we crucify it to keep our control? Or do we surrender to it? The horrors that befell These men were not just divine lightning bolts. They were the natural consequences of disconnecting from the source of life. When you unplug a lamp from the wall, the darkness isn't a punishment, it's a result. These men fought against the cornerstone. And as the scripture says, "Whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken. But on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder." Matthew 21:44. Yet, in the midst of this carnage and judgment, there is a paradox. A mystery that the apocryphal texts struggle to comprehend and the Gospels shout from the rooftops. As the hammer fell, as the spit landed, as the mockery echoed, Jesus did not call down fire. He did not summon the 12 legions of angels at his disposal. He whispered, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He was praying for Caiaphas. He was praying for Pilate. He was praying for the soldier driving the nail. And that prayer was answered. Acts 6-7 tells us that later, a great company of the priests were obedient to the faith. Some of the very men who plotted in the dark eventually knelt in the light. The deaths of the unrepentant were horrible. Yes, but the door of mercy remained open until their final breath. Judas could have run to the cross instead of the cliff. Pilate could have washed his soul instead of his hands. Caiaphas could have torn his heart instead of his robes. The tragedy is not that they sinned. The tragedy is that they refused the remedy. History records their horrible deaths as a warning, but eternity records the offer of life as a promise. You, watching this now, you stand in the same courtroom. The verdict is not out on your life yet. Do not wait until the rope snaps. Do not wait until the exile begins. Do not wait until the city burns. The mercy that was offered to his murderers is offered to you. The cross was not the end of Jesus, but it can be the end of your guilt. The choice, as it was for Pilate, is yours. What will you do with this man called Christ?